The Old Farmer. The Land and the Man. The morning sun rose gently over the rolling fields of Wheatbrook, casting a golden hue over the endless stretches of farmland. At the heart of this vast land stood an old man, weathered by time yet unbroken in spirit. His name was Henry Whitmore, a farmer whose hands had tilled the soil for more than 6 decades. Henry's farm was his life's work, a place that had seen his joys, his struggles, and his greatest memories. Every furrow in the earth, every tree by the river, and every wooden post on the fence had a story to tell. Dressed in a faded flannel shirt, worn-out jeans, and his old leather boots, Henry walked toward the barn. His dog, Rusty, an aging golden retriever, trotted beside him. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fresh hay. The farm had once been alive with laughter, his wife, Margaret, singing in the kitchen, their children chasing each other through the fields. But time had changed things. Margaret had passed 5 years ago, and his children had moved to the city in search of different lives. Now, it was just Henry, Rusty, and the land. The changing world. Henry climbed onto his old tractor, the same one he had driven for decades. The engine rumbled as he moved across the field, inspecting the crops. Wheat stood tall, swaying in the gentle breeze, and the apple trees near the house were heavy with fruit. Yet, despite the beauty of his land, Henry couldn't ignore the creeping signs of change. Farming wasn't what it used to be. Machines had replaced many of the old ways, and the younger generation no longer wanted to work the fields. The old traditions were fading, replaced by supermarkets and technology. Last year had been tough. A drought had damaged much of the harvest, and the market prices had dropped. Some of his neighbors had already sold their farms to corporations. People often asked Henry why he didn't retire and move to the city, but he always gave the same answer. "This land is my home." An unexpected visitor. One afternoon, as Henry was mending a fence near the barn, he heard the sound of a car approaching. Few visitors ever came, and when they did, it was usually someone trying to buy his land. A black SUV stopped near the house, and a young man in a crisp suit stepped out. Henry wiped his hands on his jeans and approached him cautiously. "Mr. Whitmore?" the man asked. "That's me," Henry replied. "My name is Daniel Carter. I represent Carter AgriCorp. We're interested in buying your farm." Henry sighed. "You and a dozen others before you. Not interested." Daniel smiled, as if expecting the answer. "I understand your attachment to the land, Mr. Whitmore. But times are changing. Our company can offer you a comfortable retirement." Henry shook his head. "This land isn't for sale." Daniel hesitated. "At least think about it. Farms like yours are disappearing. The world is moving forward." Henry looked at him, his sharp blue eyes filled with something Daniel didn't understand. "The world might be moving forward," Henry said, "but some things are worth holding on to." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Daniel standing there, watching the old farmer disappear into the fields. The storm. That evening, as Henry sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. A storm was coming. By nightfall, the winds howled, and the rain lashed against the windows. Henry hurried outside, securing the barn doors and making sure the animals were safe. Rusty followed, barking at the thunder. Lightning flashed, illuminating the fields for a brief moment. Then, Henry saw it. A section of his fence had collapsed, and the creek that bordered his land was rising dangerously fast. With no time to think, he ran toward the fence, fighting against the wind and rain. He grabbed the wooden planks, trying to hold them in place, but the floodwaters were strong. A sudden gust of wind knocked him off balance, and he fell into the mud. For a moment, he just lay there, exhausted. The storm roared around him, but all he could think about was how fragile everything had become. He wasn't the young man he used to be. Finally, he got to his feet, slowly making his way back to the house. He had done all he could. Now, it was up to nature. The aftermath. The next morning, Henry stepped outside to assess the damage. Branches littered the yard, the fence was in worse shape than he had thought, and part of the wheat field had been flattened by the wind. He sighed. This was the life of a farmer, fighting against nature, rebuilding after every storm. As he started clearing the debris, a voice called out to him. "Need some help, old man?" Henry turned and saw a young woman standing by the fence. She wore jeans and a dusty plaid shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. "I'm Emily," she said. "I live in town. My grandfather used to talk about you." Henry studied her. "Your grandfather?" "Robert Lanson." Henry's eyes lit up. "Bob's granddaughter?" Emily nodded. "I used to visit him every summer. He always told me about the best farmer in Wheat Brook." Henry chuckled. "Your grandfather was a good man." Emily looked around. "I was driving by and saw the damage. Thought you could use an extra pair of hands." Henry hesitated, then nodded. "All right. Let's get to work." A new beginning. Over the next few days, Emily proved to be a hard worker. She mended fences, fed the animals, and even fixed the old tractor's engine. Henry was impressed. "You ever think about farming?" he asked one afternoon. Emily shrugged. "Always loved it. But it's not easy for young people to start. Land's expensive, and nobody teaches the old ways anymore." Henry was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You learn fast." She smiled. "Guess it runs in the family." For the first time in years, Henry felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. Passing the torch. One evening, Henry sat with Emily on the porch, watching the sunset. "You ever think about taking over a farm?" he asked. Emily looked at him, surprised. "Yours?" Henry nodded. "This land needs someone who loves it. Someone who won't sell it to corporations." Emily's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" Henry smiled. "Dead serious." She looked out at the fields, her mind racing. "I'd have a lot to learn." Henry leaned back in his chair. "Then we'd better start. A legacy lives on." As the seasons passed, Henry taught Emily everything he knew. The old ways, the secrets of the soil, the rhythm of the land. The farm changed, but in the best way. New ideas blended with old traditions. The land thrived. And though Henry grew older, he was no longer alone. One evening, as he sat on the porch, watching Emily work in the fields, he smiled. The world might change, but some things, like the love for the land, were timeless.